Thank you, Senator. Senator Buchan.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome the Minister to the House very much, and I'm delighted to be here to be able to speak on this today. It's an honour to be able to speak on this here today in the present company, because I certainly believe that the various people who are present in the chamber are very fair-minded people, and I certainly very much welcome the speech by Senator Bradford, and I would concur with a lot of what he said. What I certainly think is, I'd like in this speech to look at the past, the present and the future. Where we are, this document is an appalling document. I think most people will agree that there's a necessity to it, but I don't think anybody in this House or otherwise in this country is remotely pleased that we are where we are. It's dreadful that things have come to this particular juncture, that we have to get the EU IMF to come in. I want to look at backwards, and I want to look where we are now, and I want to look forwards, because I think there's a lot to be learned. I think the only way we're going to be able to prevent ourselves from making the mistakes of the past is by looking at them. And there is a great phrase that I love, is that the only thing man learns from history is that man never learns from history. And unfortunately, I being in politics, don't sort of wish to sort of buy into that particular phrase, because I think politics actually can make a difference. But I do think one point I'd make in relation to Senator Bradford's talk is that systems to be reformed are rarely reformed from within, because particularly political systems, what they need is a good cross-party consensus, but they also need an outside impetus, in other words, in order to push them. It's very rare that a political system is changed dramatically from within, because the system that got people there in the first place is something that the people who got there tend to protect because they want to continue with it. So the reason I think we got where we are today, just going right back to the start, and I think I'd go right back to pre the year 2000. I personally wasn't in favour of the level of federalism in Europe. I wasn't in favour of the euro at the time in the way it was being put forward. Even though I would very much buy into the European project, I would be a very strong advocate of the European project. But I did, at the time, write about it, and I felt that the fact that you had a number of economies coming together in a very loose affiliation, and the economies being at different stages in their cycle, and underpinning it by a European currency, the euro, was actually a recipe for danger, not disaster, because there was always the hope that the economies would somehow come together, and that the economic cycles would match each other. But without clear political direction, it was always going to be difficult to achieve that. And indeed, my party leader alluded to that in a well-covered speech over the last few days. Maybe not quite the same point, but it was close. But certainly, I felt that we entered a mirage when we had a boom period up to around the year 2000 in this country. It was something we hadn't experienced before. We'd made a lot of money, particularly in the IT area I was involved with, the systems area, and a lot of money had flooded into the country. For a change, people were actually, reverse immigration was taking about, and people with great skills that they'd garnered abroad actually came back to this country, and they put forward those skills. They used those skills to help create this Celtic tiger that everybody was so proud of at the time. Now, unfortunately, at that point in time, around the year 2000 to 2002, things pretty much plateaued out, and our economic cycle seemed to be coming to, an end. So what we needed to do was dampen things down. But instead, what happened was we came into the euro. We had much cheaper interest rates than we should naturally have had. We didn't have devaluation. We had a currency underpinned by a different economic cycle. And what actually happened in practice, from what I can gather, is that this led to this wonderful housing boom. So we used unsustainable funding to fuel wage inflation. We used unsustainable funding to boost the economy, and we used it in a way that was inevitably going to come crashing down at a certain point in time. Now, having said that, The systemic problems that we're facing are not purely Irish. They're far from it. The systemic problem is not even a European problem. It is a worldwide problem. It's a worldwide difficulty that I certainly would look at things like the end of the Cold War, and I would look at the issue of peak oil and the huge rise in oil prices that in fact preceded Lehman Brothers Bank falling over. Because if you detach the ecological and natural world and don't have a holistic view of economics and society, I think you're never going to see the full picture of what's actually likely to happen, and you won't be able to make proper predictions as to what's likely to happen. But anyway, what did happen is, I believe in this country, is that we used the housing boom in order to insulate ourselves for a number of years' time. But unfortunately, that was always inevitably going to come to an end. And I remember particularly Michael McDowell desperately before the last general election, talking about taking off stamp duty in order to further fuel the situation. And thank goodness that didn't happen, because it would have left us in an even worse mess. But I do believe, and it's a lesson that we have to learn, is that the idea that we can pay less tax, we can have more income coming in, we can have higher wages, and we can provide better services, all in the same breath, is just fantasy. People said it at the time and were pilloried. People are fond of saying nobody ever mentioned this at the time. They absolutely did. People did mention it. There are many items were written about it, and there were some famous journalists, now infamous journalists, who were mentioning this. There were infamous commentators who did say this. There were many people who were saying it, but unfortunately, the prevailing wind at the time was very much blowing. I seem to remember a certain Taoiseach, talking about people committing suicide if they talk down the economy. And I personally thought that was an absolutely outrageous statement at the time. But I do remember as well that estate agents were repeatedly all over our media over the last number of years, the years up to 2007, saying that the housing boom would never go down, it would level off. And they were given the airtime on this. It was obviously nonsense. And I used to say to people that, look, this would be unprecedented in the history of the planet. And indeed it wasn't. It would have been unprecedented in the history of the planet. And I said, what you're talking about is akin to throwing a stone up in the air and the stone actually stays there. Because that's how sensible it is, that the law of gravity somehow didn't apply to the Irish housing boom, the building boom, whereas it has applied to every other building boom that's ever happened. As it happens, the stone did fall down and the building boom is over. Now, having said that, here we are. My own view is that it's the years from around 2001 to the present day which have caused us to be less capable of dealing with the global situation. It's not the case that we have actually caused the global situation. I don't think we should take that upon ourselves. The reality is there is a global situation out there, a global monetary difficulty. It's European-wide, and it's also, it's also in the States. It's across the whole Western world. And over the coming years, I think we're going to see great difficulty there, but I hope it's going to sort itself out. But we're in the sort of first tranche of people, unfortunately. We shouldn't be in the first tranche. We should have planned for the future. We shouldn't have acted like kiddies with the sweet shop once the euro came in. We unfortunately did make a lot of mistakes, and we didn't plan for the future well enough, and that's what our political system has left us. Now, I just want to get on to our political system, because I think Senator Bradford hit the nail on the head. The key lesson we have to learn on this is the reform of our political system, because that's what needs to come out of this. Our political system is not coping with the current crisis. It is absolutely not coping with it, and I don't think anybody in this House or otherwise is prepared to say that it is. It's quite clear that it's not coping. Now, as somebody just put it to me recently, just a few minutes ago, in fact, the reality of cabinet ministers actually currently trying to deal with queries about housing and potholes in their local area, or indeed, trying to deal with snow drifts in their local constituencies, and people ringing them about that, when there is such a huge crisis on our hands. I mean, that clientelist... Right, I need about 3 hours, but I'll respect the chair. The reality of that is atrocious. The reality of senior politicians actually having to deal with anything other than the crisis at hand is wrong. I personally think that we do need major political reform, and I think it needs to come from across parties. I think it needs to come from outside the political system as well as inside the political system. It's going to be very, very difficult for the next government, but I would hate to see a situation, I genuinely would hate to see a situation, where we just slip into this business of, oh look, it's all your fault. You said when you were in opposition that you would do X, Y, and Z, and you're not doing it, and it was much better in our day. I mean, I just find that sort of level of politics to be absolute waste of time. We need a list system in this country. We need, in fact, I have to be candid and say we need people like Minister Manstra elected, people with serious intellect. We need people elected to our Parliament who are capable of making serious intellectual contributions to our Parliament. We cannot rely on purely people who really are operating at county council level in a national context. That is not the way forward in politics. It's not the way that we're going to get out of the particular position. We need people with great imagination, great abilities in all walks of life. So systemic reform is the way, is what should come out of this document. My time is up. There are many items in this document which I think are absolutely appalling. We're going to have to work through them, but my key message here today is the system needs to be radically reformed.